and what I would probably do different, which is actually involve more people systematically. Because in the beginning, like I said, we were really also just the tech leads and we were only pulling people in when we needed to. Focused a bit more on outcome oriented artifacts. So one of those was the diagrams that I mentioned, which helped us a ton with being able to provide clarity with the domains and who owns what domain and so on.
I think the part that I love the most so far of the story is the that first of all is it was bottom up, so that shows that you don't need to have a title of architect for doing certain things. The episode is brought to you by IcePanel, a collaborative diagramming and modeling tool for architects. If you are struggling with scattered diagrams, no single source of truth, or consistent way to talk about your systems, I got you covered. IcePanel lets you model how your system works, from business views to technical details. Zoom in multiple levels to show the apps, stores, and components that make up your system. One of my favorite features is flows, which completely change how I explain architecture. Instead of static sequence diagram, I can show animated flows that people instantly understand. IcePanel make it easy to maintain your diagrams. Update once and everything syncs. No more managing duplicate objects across different diagrams. And one last cool thing is IcePanel's APIs and MCP server, which lets you connect your data to your favorite LLM. Try out at icepanel.io/Luca and get free 2-week trial. Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Dear Architects podcast. Today's guest has a very interesting story. I thought that mixing, let's say, a bit of the episode with some case studies could help a lot of us, because it's nice talking about architecture, but also some in the trenches stories can help a lot. So today with me, I have Mahdi, that is a tech leader in a company called Fashion Cloud. And Fashion Cloud is a B2B wholesale platform that's sitting in the intersection of brands and retailers. And the beauty of these, let's say, company is that currently is in a very interesting state. So they went through many acquisitions, and Mahdi is trying to rationalize how the different departments now, I would say, are working together cohesively to create a socio-technical system that works properly. So the Mahdi stories, I think, will be very interesting for you, especially if you are in transition of, let's say, a situation like Fashion Cloud, but also if you are modernizing, if you are in that kind of hybrid state where you are starting towards a rationalization of a new socio-technical system, or you are about to start. But even if you have already started the process, you are, I don't know, a few months in or few years in, you can find some interesting aspects to compare notes with a fellow architect. So without further ado, Mahdi, welcome to the Architects podcast.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and doing this.
Fantastic. So usually what I ask, I try to do like my background researches to my guests, but obviously I would like to hear your voice. I would like to understand more who you are, what you are doing. And also it would be very nice if you can explain a bit more about Fashion Cloud, in which state you are, how many teams, etc.
Yeah, sure. So I myself, I mean, you gave a pretty good intro, but I've been working in tech for a bit over 10 years. Currently working in Germany, and before this, I worked in Malaysia in fintech, and before that, it was just a bunch of mishmash of freelance positions. So that's kind of a bit of my career history. But I joined Fashion Cloud at about in 2020, and at that point, Fashion Cloud had just been 2 or 3 years after the first merger, the major merger that essentially got its name Fashion Cloud, and that was a company in Amsterdam in the Netherlands that merged with an office or a company in Hamburg, Germany, and these were two separate products, but solving similar problems in the fashion industry. One side was handling something we call Order Writer. It's an order placement application in short. and another one was a content delivery system. The Hamburg office managed the content delivery system. So we take data from brands and send it over to retailers in short, right? Before Fashion Cloud was a thing, retailers would have to maintain a list of essentially integrations and different ways they need to get data of their brands. And if you're a retailer who have like hundreds of brands, what ends up happening is now you need to maintain hundreds of different processes for how to integrate with these brands and how to get the data from them. And believe me, some of them are very painful. This can really even be just emails. You need to call them and ask for certain product data, and they will send it to you over email. There is no integration, there's no automation, and this is even a thing, or at least was a thing back then. So Fashion Cloud's value proposition really was that, hey, as a retailer, you don't need to do all this work. We will help you get that content, and we will do the work of integrating with all brands, right? Yeah, that was the start of the journey, but now we have come to a full, essentially what we call a full wholesale 360 wholesale life cycle, which is from pre-sales and anything like that, where brands are making using data to make smart decisions about what to include in their upcoming collections, to then creating pre-order potential items there, presenting that to retailers, so retailers can maybe get excited about a few potential designs and then place potential pre-orders, and then those go into to production, and some of them make it. They move on to a reorder stage, and then we track the reorder lifecycle and provide data back to brands and retailers, and then we go into post sales. So that then completes the loop, and we continue that. And we have products now for every step of the way, pretty much. And of course, these products are at different maturity levels. So some of them, like the content delivery one, has been around for a while, so relatively mature, and our flagship product actually. But we're still trying to find product market fit for a bunch of the other ones. So that's where we're at.
Nice. Also, we have a lot of ground to cover today, I would say, considering integration is never easy. And I think is, as you said, it's very fragmented and sometimes painful, like the email that we were describing. I know a bit because I worked with quite a few brands when I was living in Italy, in the fashion, for integration and not only. So it's going to be a very nice discussion. So let me start with a question that is, I would say, almost a curiosity of mine, because I never been through, let's say, an acquisition or a merger between companies. I wonder. So you have, let's say, this kind of situation where you have like multiple teams that are with different engineering culture, different projects, different architecture, and everything, that they are at some point sitting underneath the same CTO, and they need to start to work together. So where do you start? What is the first step for starting to rationalize the, let's say, how you want to achieve, or what you want to achieve inside the organization?
That's a very good question, because we've been through a few of these, right? I think in my time at Fashion Cloud, we've been through three. One was the merger. Well, actually, I joined directly after the merger, but still to this day, dealing with some of the integration issues. Um, but yeah, so usually the very first thing that we deal with is actually finding out what systems and components do we even have, right? And what problems are they solving? So in 2023 was when we had our last acquisition. That was essentially for a product that we call Digital Showroom. Super nice product, very nice people that came along with that acquisition. And yeah, essentially we started, we were trying to think, okay, how do we put these pieces together? Because we still hadn't finished one previous acquisition, full integration of it that happened maybe a year or two before that, and then the merger itself in 2018, that was or 2017, that was something that we were still dealing with. So really the first question we had was, what are really all the components that we have? So we got together with a bunch of the most senior engineers who we're all now tech leads, and we were like, okay, how do we know what we have? That's really all that we knew. We knew that we didn't know every part of the system that we were working with. We knew that we didn't have everything surfacing up, and representation was poor. So yeah, we were like 3 or 4 tech leads at the time, but at least 2 products did not have representation, or people like super senior engineers who had been there with the product for a while. So we just started there to really surface everything. I would be happy to also describe how we did that.
Please go ahead.
In short, it's DDD. We decided to kind of we decided to organize ourselves with DDD as our guiding, design language, let's say. And so we started to identify the domains based on, because we were doing this from an engineering point of view, we kind of had to start building from bottom up, if you understand what I mean. We didn't have buy-in or any kind of like wider audience in terms of, okay, do people know what a domain is? And do people are people on the same page about the domains that we have? Do people slice Fashion Cloud the same way? So what we thought would work best is if we start with our engineering knowledge, and first step, we document what we know concretely exists as part of the system, because the expression, your system isn't what you say it is what the system is and what it does, right? Something like that. I probably butchered that, but anyway. Yeah, so we started to go around doing workshops with teams. We set up like a DDD workshop, and each tech lead was conducting these with a bunch of teams we assigned to ourselves. And we went around, did these workshops. What we wanted to get out was essentially what we called a whole narrative. And the narrative is, at this point, I can summarize it as just the C4 model story. But we just focused on level 1 and level 2. And yeah, so we just wanted to know, okay, who are your customers? What does your system do? What systems do you have? And what systems do you depend on? That's pretty much it. And we just went around doing this for at least half a year. Just like collecting this information and conducting these workshops and organizing it. And then we, as tech leads, we went through a bunch of iterations on how do we want to present this data. That was actually quite funny as well. We tried multiple different angles. We tried like layering the services in terms of dependencies to show, okay, we have tier 1 type of services, which are services that don't depend on anything. And then, you layer it up and that kind of stuff. And we tried creating also domain-based separations. But ultimately, what really worked was looking at how our sales or commercial teams were speaking about our products. And we realized that everybody was using the word platform in an overloaded way. But we thought, okay, maybe we can use that to our advantage. So we created a separate list of platform services and a separate list of individual products. And then that's where we started to kind of put things together. And that built our story at Fashion Cloud into a presentable form.
Okay, that's interesting. So there is a lot to unpack here. I have like few questions based on what you said. So The first one is very interesting. So you talk about this platform that you recognize towards the end. We're talking with the business side. And you decide some parts can be common across all the different products. Some others should be vertical to the different products that you have. That makes a lot of sense to me. Uh, how did you select which one was, let's say, the first common part that you want to extract across the different platforms?
Hmm. Um, I wish I could tell you it was data driven, but it was really gut instinct driven from the people who were involved. Yeah, and of course we had honed our instincts through either solving customer problems beforehand or just hearsay from this person complaining about something and we had heard it and that had eventually built up some kind of intuition. But in those early stages, I think, by the way, you asked for Fashion Cloud in terms of size. I think maybe a lot of listeners might relate because we're rather a smaller shop going from like a startup to a scale up kind of state. Um, and we have about currently around 50 engineers with around 6 teams, something like that, depending on what you count as a team. Um, yeah, and so to your question of how do we decide to prioritize or what should be platform and shared, it was really just based on instinct, and it is obvious at that point to those of us who had this instinct and were working on that. And that was mainly, of course, product data, because that's our flagship product, as I said, content delivery. So product data is like the largest data set I think we have, and it's one of the most important that pretty much every product at Fashion Cloud uses. We all need to use the same catalog set of product data that we get from brands, and that was one of the easiest ones to say, okay, this is a platform item. Besides that, we go on to like a little bit more common stuff like users and organizations and brand entities and retailer entities and so on. And those are also mostly CRM related stuff, which again, kind of in every platform, I should be able to log in with the same credentials to any part of it, right? So that's kind of also a given. So these things stood out to us.
Okay. And you mentioned that you were leveraging domain-driven design as a technique for, let's say, thinking about okay, what are these domains, etc. So I guess you mainly leverage strategic domain-driven design. So you start to look into boundaries and let's say labeling the different products with specific, I don't know, generic or supporting domain, I guess.
Um, yes. Um, yeah, that was the driving force behind the design decisions that we made. Um, the first step was to identify domains, and really that itself also took some time, even though it seems like a very easy thing because you really need that alignment. And then we went on to like, okay, subdomains and what are subdomains of another and what are the bounded contexts that we have within them, and but we left a lot of that out in those first early stage iterations because DDD can also get, from my experience and my knowledge, which is quite limited, I don't proclaim to be a DDD expert, but we really tried to employ a DDD light kind of approach. So we stuck to, okay, very simply, what are our domains? And then at most, what are those subdomains, just enough to get us to cover like the 80/20 of critical paths that every team provides. Um, we thought the rest would just come naturally.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I hope that it came naturally over time.
Yeah, we're still working on, making those critical paths very obvious. But I think we've made a lot of progress in being able to actually identify even non-critical stuff. in the same language.
I think the part that I love the most so far of the story is the that first of all is it was bottom up, so that shows that you don't need to have a title of architect for doing certain things. It's just, let's say, the level of ownership that you want to have, that I strongly believe. I don't think you must have the role of architect for doing certain things. And secondly, the fact that you started with the most, let's say, human things ever. So, okay, let's try. We have, let's say, 6, 7 teams, whatever they were, and I want to discuss with all my peers the best way to move forward, to try to figure out what the best way to let's say skin this problem, right? And that, I think, helped at so not only from the technical perspective but also from the human perspective, connection, the empathy that you created, the fact that you start to see how others were working, what they were thinking, and stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah, I think actually that is something that I probably would have done. You know, you put it in such nice words, and if I had it in those nice words back then, I probably would have done that a little bit more aggressively, even to connect there. But you know, like I said, because it was not very directive based or very data driven, we kind of had to do that to some extent. I mean, the only real directive we had was, okay, nobody knows what is actually their responsibility. We don't have clear boundaries. Who's supposed to do what? Who's responsible for what? Um, yeah, so incident responses became a bit messy because people didn't know, hey, should I take this alert or not? That kind of stuff. So this was like really the only directive level direction that we had. Um, and besides that, we just kind of had to figure out, okay, the problem is that there aren't clear lines. People don't speak the same language and don't reason about our system the same way. So we thought it was a design problem, and then we just got to work there.
Fast forward X month from that point, do you think that was let's say helpful for the company?
I would say so because just having it in written form and documented after those workshops that we did, and ultimately coming to an agreement with the tech leads on how do we want to present this story of fashion cloud systems. Once we had that, it became super easy to go into a meeting and someone says, oh, I don't know if this alert belongs to me or not. And you say, look, you see this box over here? That means it's your thing to deal with, you know? Or if the code base includes code that doesn't belong to you, that's fine. You see this box over here? That means you need to move it out. So it became easy to assign next steps and make things more actionable rather than someone says, hey, I don't know if I should take this, and you genuinely don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, it's an approach that I took several times in the past because especially, for instance, I remember when we opened in my previous job a dev center in Amsterdam. We had to ramp up very quickly. There is 140 people that were there. So the idea was literally starting to socialize, and the headquarters was in London. So very often we were going to Amsterdam, trying to explain and trying to understand better their point of view, the struggle and stuff like that. So we organized several session workshops. We were organizing dependencies, understanding better, and trying to visualize as much as possible. We introduced like event storming, event modeling, and other things. So definitely, I recognize very well this approach. So it's something that I used and I'm still using a lot when I don't know about what's going on inside the companies. Very often, creating empathy is the first step for succeeding in any, let's say, transformation that you are into.
Yeah, and in those in that project, did you have like pretty much everyone involved? Like, what was the scope of people who were involved?
Yeah, the Amsterdam team was mainly the techies at the beginning. Then we recognized that the fact that we started to have friction between product and the tech department. So we started to decentralize as well, also the product team. So we started to have like product team in local, so in Amsterdam, then I started to have also some of my architects in Amsterdam as well, because it wasn't sustainable doing every other week travel to Amsterdam, despite it's like less than 1 hour by flight from London. But in general, the idea was okay, we start with tech because we need, let's say, the most amount of people. Then we started to augment with products. We created basically a division that was taking care about a specific area of the system, because what I did is like you were describing, I started to look into the subdomains of the system, and then I divided the dev centers per subdomain. So I reduced drastically in pre-pandemic the amount of communication you have across teams. So if you have to, let's say, engage with another team that is not present inside your office, it is easier to send an email, but that is very unlikely is going to happen regularly, because the boundaries that we design were quite well defined, and we try to use eventual consistency where possible, therefore events to communicate between dev centers that reflects on the independence of the team. So in order to solve 90% of the problems, you literally walk to the desk of another person, while you don't need to understand if in that country is holiday or is not holiday, or this person is ill or is in the office and is working, is in a meeting, whatever. You literally try to drastically reduce the amount of effort that you need to have for this kind of situation. That's why I try to design things leveraging domain-driven design as much as possible, at least on the strategic level, where I see, let's say, the domains and assign characteristics to the domains.
Yeah, very smart, and it seems very conscious.
Yeah, no, I was saying I had to, because when we were onboarding basically 1 or 2 teams every other week. So we we had to know more or less why we were doing certain things. Otherwise, friction arises very quickly.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think this is something that I have learned doing this similar kind of process at Fashion Cloud, and what I would probably do different, which is actually involve more people systematically. Because in the beginning, like I said, we were really also just the tech leads, and we were only pulling people in when we needed to. And I think that itself was one of the reasons why for us it took many months to get started. Um, but you know, you live and you learn.
Hold on. It's Jacob from IcePanel. Hello.
Hey Luca, how's it going? Sorry to drop in like this on you. I was just out snowboarding and I was thinking about your listeners who are all wrangling diagrams and documentation instead of improving and upgrading their systems. It's why we built IcePanel. It's for architects who are fed up of tens or hundreds of diagrams that disagree. They don't have a shared language between business and engineering, and their diagrams are rotting the second that they create them. In IcePanel, you model your system once. You can go from a high-level business context down to the containers. When you make changes, which is inevitable, you update it once, and it'll sync across all of the views that you've created. When you're explaining a user journey or how data flows through your system, you don't just wiggle your mouse on boxes during a presentation. You can actually create step-by-step guides to explain how things work so that everyone's on the same page. Anyway, I'll let you get back to the podcast, and I'm going to get back to snowboarding. We'll speak real soon. Stay chill, Luca.
What a crazy guy, this Jacob. Where were we? Oh, absolutely. That's the beauty of architecture is that there is no right or wrong. It's just, let's say, constant learning. The context drives certain decisions. More experience you have, and better you can navigate the complexity of a socio-technical system. In my experience, at least. Let me ask you a question. So, at some point, you started to, you said you write the document down. I guess you started to design, let's say, some diagrams, how the things were working, how you communicate between, let's say, systems, etc. So, My question to you is, can you tell us, so you mentioned that you were using the C4 model. First of all, for people that don't know the C4 model, can you describe like in a couple of sentences? And secondly, can you tell us, because there are 4 levels, and so you mentioned you were using just the 2. I will share later in the description of the video also an ebook that is, let's say, completely free that I wrote, and you can download and at least have a glance of what C4 model is and how to use that, because I created also an example in that book. So if you can walk us through basically why you landed in the C4 model and what was the 2 levels that you mentioned.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So C4, and I also just had to pull it up just to make sure I don't get it wrong on the spot. But C4 is essentially an abbreviation for context, container, component, and code. And the idea with this is each of those are diagram levels of granularity of detail. So you start at the context, which is absolutely no system details. Your system is just a black box, and you just talk about, or you just show some of the examples I mentioned earlier, which are who are your consumers, who are your dependencies, and that's pretty much it. What can they do with that? That's pretty much it. And then you just go deeper on those layers. After context, you just have the containers, which is you can call them your actual applications, your databases, um, your backends and your front ends, and your maybe your messaging stream and that kind of stuff. And then you go into components, which is what makes up an individual application. And finally, you have code, which is the end all state of detail. So we focused, or we came about using C4 actually completely coincidentally, because, like I said, we had our own terminology. We came up with the concept of the narrative, which might have subconsciously been because we had already been familiar with DDD and C4, but the narrative was essentially just really a Miro board with 3 legends of like 3 colors, or 3 marking items, 3 boxes of um, items you could put on the board there. That would tell you the story of your context level diagram, essentially. What system do you have? What service does it provide, and to whom? And what dependencies do you have? That was pretty much it. The reason for this is because I found that a lot of times we were going into way too much detail very quickly. And if I'm trying to build a organizational description of what it is that we do, I don't really need all of those details. And I just want to know what is our surface area, what is the tip of the iceberg that I need to start digging into, essentially, right? So that's how we kind of came about using the C4 model. Yeah, and this at some point converted from Miro diagrams to IcePanel diagrams. That's where we actually decided it was time for an upgrade.
Yeah, tell me more about this, because I think tools is another. I know that the Dear Architects community is always interested to understand which tool should I use to do what. I think there are many tools out there that you can use for building software. Miro is let's say present in many enterprises, but it's a solution that fits them all. Like it covers a lot of ground, but not everything is specific to a specific technique. So in your case, you were mentioned IcePanel. I think it's a fantastic tool. I use that for quite a while. I recommend it to many customers, and I think is fantastic because it's focused on solving one specific problem, that is visualizing C4 model diagrams properly. So tell me more why you went with that tool, and what was the reasoning behind of the migration from Miro to IcePanel.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So like I said, we came up with this diagram and this concept of the narrative, and we started putting those into Miro, and very quickly, I felt like, well, actually, let me put it differently. Very quickly, we started linking each of those boxes and linking them to other Miro diagrams and frames on the same board. And then it started going out of date because people were updating one diagram but not the others, and and a lot of times people were just copy pasting the same thing and then editing what they needed to edit, but then leaving everything else untouched, even though it was redundant or unnecessary. So it was really a lot of the organizational aspect around it. Plus, we couldn't actually show ownership very easily. So what I did was I created little sticky notes or tags that I would then manually copy paste over every object in Miro, and then I had to group it. And really, it was very low level, essentially, in short. So I could do everything I needed to do, sure, but it was just very low level, very time consuming. And I'm pretty sure if I would have asked people to keep doing that, it wouldn't have been adopted as easily as it was. So yeah, at some point I went back to IcePanel. I actually found IcePanel back in 2021 initially, um, maybe even 2020 itself. But back then I was really not doing any kind of architecture work. And when you are not doing architecture work, they are truly just boxes, right? That you're just drawing and they're meaningless. So I didn't really pay attention to it until we did this work. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, let me give it a try. And I got on a trial account and I just started moving some of the diagrams over. Then I showed it to a bunch of people, and suddenly everybody was like, can we keep using this? So, yeah, that's kind of how it caught on. And it was really to do with the organization. Like you said, they were really focused on um, doing C4 modeling well, and they're just focused on that. And that has been quite helpful for us in being able to actually stick to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I used icepanel for the first time, I remember one thing that stick with me, and I was quite excited, is the fact that yes, you have the C4 model implementation, but you have also the concept of flows that I describe usually to people. Is imagine like sequence the diagramming, but in interactive fashion. So you you literally can walk people through how your system works, and you, especially in a meeting, or if you are with let's say the C-suite or whatever, you can use that flow. You created the flow, and then you start to just click click click, and the diagram is moving and highlighting the part that you need to focus talking about. For me, that was great. And the other thing is, as you mentioned, I want to keep up to date all my diagrams. The fact that I can copy and paste the C4 model in a specific view, and inside, I don't know, a wiki, inside Notion, inside that, those kind of things for me were two killer features, because those are the things that I struggle so much in the past with diagrams. So definitely, I think they did something very outstanding over there. Okay, so let's talk about a level down from the C4 model. So I imagine that at some point you started to use other mechanisms or tools for, let's say, writing architectural decision record, request for comments, or capturing, let's say, decision that you made over time. Because as you said, I want to have a platform that does X, Y, Z, and probably you socialize this information. That's my wild guess, but tell me more about that.
Yeah, we definitely needed to complete the picture of this C4 model and IcePanel introduction. We had been using ADRs and RFCs in some teams in various ways. Every team, I think, had their own registry in Notion or in a code base that they maintained for their own team's usage, essentially. But essentially, this was really limited to the teams. And like I said, one of the things that we were trying to do was bring cohesion across teams and, break the silos, so to say. So when we had this picture of our domains and what source of truths, for example, should live where, and how do we communicate, and what are our communication standards, and all of those, we of course showed those, a lot of those, with IcePanel through diagrams and flows, as I mentioned. That was also an interesting, by the way, process of getting people to actually backfill their diagrams and processes. But anyway, so then we had to kind of have a way of keeping this stuff up to date. Not only up to date in terms of documentation, but also in terms of keeping consistent with those practices that we talked about. So ADRs were one of the first choices to supplement this architecture review process. We came up with a list of cross-cutting concerns that we kind of expected, okay, if teams have a project or something that affects these cross-cutting concerns, which are, for example, in our case, it's like technology addition or new domains to be created, like a completely new data model to be created, and so on. These required architecture review. And the way you would present this is through an ADR format. Once we had this architecture review process defined and these cross-cutting concerns defined, the ADRs were one of the first choices that we thought of to present this data, these plans that teams would have to show how it would affect the cross-cutting concerns. So we just took a template off of the internet, and we've been trying to encourage teams to use that since. I think adoption has varied. Some teams are using this often. Others maybe don't even have that many architecture choices. So usage is, to varying amounts.
And out of curiosity, how did you encourage people to, let's say, leverage this mechanism? Because that is one thing I've seen companies struggle sometimes. Like you, as you described, so we are using IcePanel for the C4 model. We are using, let's say, ADRs for capturing specific decision, whatever. So it would be nice to understand, okay, how can I cannot say enforce because it's the wrong word I would say to say, but I would like to have cohesion in my documentation where people buys into the process that we are building, because at the end of the day it won't be useful only for the tech leaders but also for them as well.
Yeah. If we're really so for IcePanel diagrams itself, one of the things we did was introduce that to acceptance criteria in tickets. So that's kind of that governance side of it, where we said, okay, you have to tick off an item that says, does my task require changes on IcePanel? If yes, then that was expected to be done. However, to provide actual use, this is like actual use for the developers themselves. One of the things that I do with some of the teams is we have regular architecture review sessions. Some other teams do this in simply in refinement sessions. But essentially, every every senior developer who is leading a project would prepare their plan upfront as flows in IcePanel and draft documents in IcePanel. And then in those refinement sessions, we would go through that. That would save a lot of time in having to read maybe a lengthier, more detailed documentation. And also, it just made the whole process a bit more collaborative because we were going through an interactive, as you said, an interactive experience to go through click-through flows and then talk about it and see what other connections there are and how it gets affected. And that was pretty helpful for the teams to provide feedback to them and so on. Besides that, I do sometimes tell the developers that sometimes these docs are like ticket statuses. So they're for other people, not for yourself. You already know what state your ticket is in, but you need to communicate that to others. So if I understand your workflow better, then of course that also helps you, because then when I'm in meetings and I need to figure out how something is going, then I can defend or let's say describe a more accurate state of how things work. Like you said, Luca, we also use this approach of you maintain these diagrams in IcePanel, and then I can use them to kind of in real time explain how a feature is supposed to work. For example, one concrete project that I worked on with a lead engineer from our CRM team, we call him Ale. We had quite a lot of back and forth on that project with different levels of management and different like PMs, but also senior management and so on, and head of product and so on. And while Ale was the subject matter expert, because he knew the details of what needed to happen and he had done the research, I was often the one who was pulled into meetings with others to explain why we needed to go for this direction or how it worked, essentially. And at this point, Ale and I were already very aligned on how to work with IcePanel together. So he was consistent with keeping that up to date, and I'm pretty confident in my ability to read IcePanel diagrams. So when I would get pulled into these meetings, I would literally just pull up the diagram right there, and I would have the current plan just right there, and then I would spontaneously explain it to stakeholders. And of course, the context I already had helped me do the rest, right? But without that, each of those would have been essentially me either saying the wrong thing potentially because it was outdated, or I would have had to say, I'll get back to you. So at best, it's extra time, and at worst, it's miscommunication. So this allowed me to also help the developers, maintain focus, um, be able to continue their work, and it became an incentive for them to maintain these documents.
Perfect. So there is one situation though that I would like to hear how you handle in your company that I found myself in quite a few times. And obviously I had to handle differently based on the context, but I'm looking forward to hear your answer here. So there are always some cross-cutting concerns. So you said we try to create, let's say, this team that are as independent as possible, that we have like a platform that is potentially, say, shared across or share capabilities across multiple teams. But I wonder, at least in my experience, there is always the classic feature that happens once or twice or multiple times per year that requires coordination between teams. So your scenario is I aim for having independent teams. I aim to have, let's say, people that are let's say can move in a certain direction independently. They have their senior developers that can, or tech lead that can help guiding them towards the direction. But when you have, let's say, these cross-cutting concerns, how do you usually handle this kind of situation?
Yeah, so we did define these cross-cutting concerns that we care about to actually look into in, let's say, a Notion page, which describes with some examples what those are. Beyond that, to be honest, we really rely on the lead engineers and tech leads to flag these things. At the moment, it's more of a guidelines that we kind of expect people to follow. for the sake of their own service reliability, because a lot of these things affect how their services work and interact with other teams. So we kind of just at the moment expect people to do the right thing, so to say. But we have then provided the way on how to flag it, and all of those paths are paved.
Let me ask you a question on this point. So, okay, so it's very organic. I like that because I think you are in a size that you can afford that. Obviously, in other type of companies, I've seen, let's say, I cannot say more structure governance around that, but it's a mechanism that is oiled already inside the organization. My question is, okay, one thing I have seen firsthand several times is, okay, so the developers are starting to work on a specific feature, and then I don't know, 6 months later is in production or less, and then suddenly there is another feature that impacts the previous one. So how can they propose changes on the architecture with this federated model that you are basically describing, because everyone is quite autonomous from what I heard? Do they speak like with their tech lead, or they can create I don't know, a document or a proposal on IcePanel, or how does it work?
Yeah, so actually, there is no dedicated or distinct architect role, so anyone can do these architecture work, um, which, like I mentioned, we just follow guidelines and some guardrails there, but so it can get a bit chaotic. But yeah, the architecture review process basically asks um, each of these developers who are trying to make an architecture proposal to evaluate whether it affects the cross-cutting concerns, and then they would draft up an ADR for it and escalate that to the tech leads. Yes. Then what happens is we have a look. It's kind of like a self-assigned based on scope. So if, let's say, I mainly work on the platform engineering side of things and also our platform experience for our customers, and if I see that an ADR affects anything in my scope, then I will self-assign to that ADR, and then I will consult for the team. Um, yeah, so like you said, you used the word organic. I think that's the right word. It kind of happens in that way, but really anyone can do this at any point. So they can, if it's a feature they built 6 months ago and they want to bring this up, they can do so. If it does not affect anything in the cross-cutting concerns, they can actually just go ahead and do it within their team. All they need to do is just create a ticket for it and then talk about it within their team in one of their, I don't know, even in a stand up, that would work. And then they can just proceed with it. So it's quite straightforward, especially, I guess, at our size.
I really like on all this conversation, to be honest, Mahdi, the thing that I like the most is the fact that everyone is an owner. There is an ownership mindset that seems pretty strong inside your company, and that is not, let's say, that happens unintentionally. You need to create, let's say, the right engineering culture for that, and I think is a fantastic story what you describe, because I have seen. Other, let's say, situation where people don't feel part of the discussion or don't feel part of the decision. What you are describing is everything can do the best for what they think is the best. Then obviously it might or might not. We discover later on, but they try to do the best on the side their domain, and when there are cross-cutting concerns, they consult with other teams. I think I really like how the culture that you created over there, and the empowering people to do these kind of things. That is exactly where I believe we are heading to, where obviously in large organization might become more tricky, but still I think is definitely interesting. And one question to follow up on this is, okay, I believe that obviously you have heard quite a lot of AI noise over the last few years, I would say. Did you start to integrate anything on your practices or tools or anything on AI? And if so, what is that honestly worked well for you?
Yeah, I'm happy you asked because I do have some of these examples also for documentation where we were just discussing. Um, but we kind of have um, an approach to AI at the moment where it's like we subscribe to the mindset of let chaos reign and then reign chaos in kind of setup. So at the moment, anyone can get pretty much any AI tool they want to explore, or any framework they would like to use. We had some teams trying out BMAD for development, and other teams trying out Agent OS for development. And these are like different. In case you're not familiar with it, it's different development frameworks essentially that are really just markdown files and a set of instructions. But just recently, one thing I was looking into was a totally new service that I had been working on with Agent OS as well, that I was helping one of the teams set up. And as soon as I realized, hey, I need to communicate the function of the service with a bit of a wider audience. Luckily enough, we had we had just seen the release of IcePanel's model as code functionality, and so very quickly we just asked it to summarize uh, the new service we had built using agents, to create the IcePanel diagrams for it as well, or rather the models and their connections, the objects and their connections, and so on. And it did a really good job. We managed to have all of the whole process documented with all of its dependencies and everything in like I think in a matter of like almost 2 hours. Everything was done, and my first thought was, how can I implement this into the CI so that this is kind of automated? These documentations now no longer have to become a chore, and even potentially at some point, I don't know where we're heading with this AI development stuff, and I think there's a lot of controversial stuff to be said around that. But potentially at some point it could even be the other way around, where from these diagrams you would generate some part of a code, if you have certain practices set up. So you could either have automated documentation being created in CI, or you can have the other way around, code being generated from your diagrams in CI or in a previous step. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff ahead of us for that, that we are actually looking to explore. But in terms of teams using them, we use them for development mainly. I just recently used one to create a service creator, which takes our service template, our gold standard approach, let's say, and then spins up services for you. What would have taken me, as someone who, let's say, at Fashion Cloud is well versed, it would have taken me at least half a day, will now take 7 minutes. So this was quite wild. Um, yeah. So these are roughly the general ways that we're using AI at Fashion Cloud.
Nice. I like the experimentation angle that you shared is very cool. And yes, I think documentation definitely could have a boost through AI. There are, with my experimentation, I've seen that leveraging meta languages, like you described. So I create the model and then IcePanel that the visualization is the best approach so far, with almost any tool. So I'm glad that you try out also this new feature of IcePanel. Let me ask the last question. So if you can go back at the beginning of your journey, what would you say to, let's say, to yourself that could help to accelerate these transformation and shift of mindset that you let's say are currently doing?
I think it's a little bit more of a political answer rather than a technical one. But in our socio-technical environment, it makes sense. I think partially it would be like 50% of it would probably be start working with leads and decision makers earlier. So we were collecting a lot of data from developers and from the teams who were working with these systems, and that was great. As we also talked about earlier in the session. But once we were ready to roll out some changes, we also kept continuing to do that, and that ate up a bunch of time. Whereas we could have been a lot more effective if we had aligned um, with those teams, as for example PMs and their EMs and so on, because then those teams would have been empowered to actually take action. And the other is to have focused a bit more on outcome-oriented artifacts. So one of those was the diagrams that I mentioned, which helped us a ton with being able to provide clarity with the domains and who owns what domain and so on. That was one of the good examples. But a lot of other times we just focused on figuring it out ourselves and not necessarily translating that into artifacts that other people could work with um, soon enough. So I think that would have been a focus point as well if I were to do that again.
That's fair. I think the main takeaway here is definitely federated architecture is doable if you create, let's say, an environment that enables you to do. The second one for me is people first and trying to understand how everything is working before you start to immediately go with the solution, because otherwise you might be burned further down the line, because at the beginning everything looks amazing, but then in the long run it might not be. And then I would add one thing that I usually, an advice that I usually said to my architecture team in the past. Your work is not only being technical. I know you don't have to be the most technical person in the job, but being empathic. So creating the bridges, because at the end of the day, without collaboration, a social technical system cannot work. It's just friction over friction and frustration that leads to nowhere at the end of the day. While if everyone cares, like in Fashion Cloud, you will be definitely in a better place to work with. That's my takeaways here. I hope that you find this helpful. Mahdi, it was an absolute pleasure having you in this podcast, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom and experience.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to be here.
Perfect. So thank you everyone that listened to us. I hope to see you in the next episode of Dear Architects podcast. A quick thank you again to IcePanel for sponsoring this episode. If you're looking for a better way to map complex systems, check them out at icepanel.io/Luca. And remember, stay chill